maybe you're trying to build a side hustle, or you just want to build games you can play with your friends either over the internet or in person. But if you're thinking about building indie games like me, you might be wondering which game engine or tool to use. In this video, I'll go through some problems I ran into while trying to make prototypes of multiplayer games, as well as the approach I plan to use for now. And of course, this is my current opinion, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. I'll also mention some tools you can use for free and an experimental project I'm working on to try to make it a little easier for myself to do the specific things I want to do. Sound interesting? Let's go to story time. Let's start with why, the situation. Story time. So let's say you're a coder. That's cool. But you realize your computer can't run Unreal or Unity because they're too big and you don't want to or can't buy a new computer. You also tried Godot, but so far every P2P or peer-to-peer project you looked at either requires hacks like editing the engine itself, or the example code only seems to work on localhost on one computer, which doesn't seem to really help with security and your goal of playing it with friends. And if you're a front-end web developer like me, you might want to leverage what you already know with JavaScript. Now, building for the web is nice because that means no one in the group needs to buy a console. Everyone can play if they have a phone or any device that has a browser. And you can make use of native web technologies like WebRTC. So to recap the problem or situation, you're accounting for limited computer memory and power while leveraging front-end skills to build multiplayer games without the need to pay for a server, as long as you're not building a massively multiplayer online game or MMO. You're content with, playing a relatively small game with a small group of friends. It could be with friends who can't meet in person or, like me, simply don't have their own game consoles. Now, given this context, you might find the following decisions interesting, or at least appreciate the trade-offs. So, what will I use to build games? I'm already comfortable working with vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so hopefully that means I can keep the code small and have a lot of creative freedom. Now, you might think that a game written in web technologies can't be published to Steam, but I believe you actually can by compiling to a desktop app using Tari. In the meantime, I can publish HTML games to itch.io for free. And besides, like I mentioned, a game that can run in the browser can run on any device that has a browser, like cell phones or laptops, or TVs that can connect to those cell phones or laptops. If I need to integrate 3D, physics, or other things, I'll have to make more decisions, and maybe I'll have to deal with lower level decisions, but I feel I can also add and swap libraries more flexibly. And this brings me to serverless multiplayer. One way to make devices talk to each other is through a server, but you can also achieve that with peer-to-peer connections. After some peer discovery, peer-to-peer connections let devices talk to each other directly. This also means I don't need to pay for a dedicated server. This can be done through the native web API for WebRTC, but there's a library that takes care of the details for you for peer discovery and connections. But even that seems like not high enough in abstraction for me. I'd like to do some pretty specific things with my games, and I'd also like to make it easier for myself to connect to game controllers if people have them. And this brings me to an experimental project I'm working on called Trystero Rollup, which is kind of pronounced like Twister Rollup. It's a convenience wrapper around the Trystero library and the Gamepad API. A link to the project on GitHub will be in the description below. Now, there's still a few features and bugs that I think are critical to take care of before I build games on top of it, but hopefully this doesn't become a form of procrastination. I'm not working on games full-time, so I guess we'll just have to see how it goes. And on top of all this considered, I suspect I'll have to temper my expectations. I'll treat this as an experiment in creating indie games to play with friends. I'm not expecting to create AAA games. Now, here are some free tools I found along the way that you might be interested in. You can create music for free in the Chrome Music Lab experiment SongMaker. Or you can find CC0 licensed sound effects and music on freesound.org. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but CC0 basically means that you're allowed to use them for commercial purposes for free, and you're not required to give credit. You can see a link for more info on Creative Commons 0 in the description. And there will also be a search link with a license filter already set up, along with the links to all the other things I'm mentioning today. If you want to create visuals, but you can't afford Photoshop, there's Photopea. It works like Photoshop, but is free to use. Just keep in mind that it might not have all the features you want right now. In the past, I've also used other software for various other visuals, animations, and assets, and FontForge lets you create custom fonts. This might be especially helpful if you want to remap letters to symbols, like for a constructed language for your game. And like I mentioned before, you can use Tari to convert apps built with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS into desktop apps. So far, it seems like a good alternative to Electron, and I believe using either one can be done in preparation for publishing on Steam. But in the meantime, you can publish games for free on itch.io. And of course, to set up serverless multiplayer with JavaScript, there's the experimental project Trystero, which builds on top of Trystero and the Gamepad API. I'm still figuring things out as I go, but I hope you found this helpful or at least interesting. Thanks for watching.